There are so many great options for football boots around the $100 price point. And three of the best boots that you can get in that range are going to be the Nike Premier 3, the Adidas Copa Gloro, and the New Balance 442 V2 Pro. Now, I've gotten to try on and play in each of these boots over the past year, so in this video, I'm going to talk about what makes them unique and which one may be best for you. And at the end of the video, if you're interested in picking up any of these boots, I'll leave links in the description where you can find them for sale online. And also, if you do end up enjoying the video, please leave a like because it really helps out the channel. So to kick things off, let's talk about the design of these three boots. So starting off with the Nike Premier 3, this is one of the first all-leather football boots that I owned, and I was even an owner of the Nike Premier 2 that came a generation before this. So with the Nike Premier 3, you're going to get, I think, a combination of a retro design and something a little bit more modern. It's going to have a full kangaroo leather upper. Now, one thing I do want to note is that although the Nike Premier 3 is currently made out of kangaroo leather, it's possible that could change into 2024 because Nike is starting to produce fewer leather football boots. If you remember last year, they discontinued using leather in the Tiempo series, and it's very likely that in the coming months, the Premier will go the same way and turn into a synthetic material. So if you are interested in getting a kangaroo leather Nike Premier, now would probably be the time to do it. But the kangaroo leather that's used in these boots is incredibly soft. And of the three boots that we're talking about today, I do think the Nike Premier definitely has the softest and most plush leather out of all three models. Now, the softness isn't always going to correlate with a higher quality, but if you do value that soft plush feeling, the Nike Premier is going to offer that. And in terms of the overall aesthetic of these boots, I absolutely love the design of the Premier 3s. I have them in this platinum colorway with some gold accents that you can see on the rear there. And this is easily one of my favorite colorways that's offered in the Premier. And overall, I think Nike just does an amazing job with the different colors they offer in this boot. Definitely a little bit more creative than what's offered from Adidas and New Balance in this comparison. And if you just check the website, I'll show some images as well, but you can just get these in some of the coolest colorways available. And Nike just also has some cool embellishments here. Like, look at this cool swoosh that you get with these embossed elements around the sole plate. I mean, they didn't even have to do that, but God, it's a nice touch. Now, the stitching is going to be really minimal throughout most of the upper, and on the sides of the boot, you're going to get these really soft, pillowy sections that are going to be especially good for dampening your first touch. Then you're going to have a traditional lacing system with the Premier 3s, as you'll get with the other two boots that we discuss as well. And the Premiers are also going to come with a fold-over tongue that is optional whether or not you want to keep. For me, I used the fold-over tongue for the first few months, and then I opted to remove it, as you can see here. I think the fold-over tongue with the Premiers looks okay, but it doesn't have the same elasticated cover that you get with the Copa Gloros that we'll talk about later. And for me, I personally thought that the boots just looked a little bit cleaner with that tongue removed. I think it gives it a more modern aesthetic that I really liked. But if you want, you can take a similar approach that I did and just have the tongue on for the first few weeks and then decide whether or not you want to keep it from there. Moving on to the sole plate, you're going to get a really simple design with 13 conical studs that are going to be great for use on both firm ground and artificial grass. And as we go through the other boots that we're comparing this to, you'll see that that's a common feature. And regarding the snappiness of the sole plate, it's actually going to be really bendable, which is different than most other sole plates you find from Nike. In comparison, if you looked at the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro or the Elite version, it's going to have a much more rigid, snappy sole plate. Whereas this is going to be probably one of the most flexible sole plates that Nike offers. So essentially that just means that they're going to be a little bit less rigid on feet and have more of a relaxed feel when you're on the pitch. All right, next up, we got the Copa Gloro. And of all the three boots on this list, these are going to be the most similar to the Nike Premier 3. So I would say the Copa Gloro was almost released as a direct competitor to the Nike Premier because the Nike Premier has been around for several years now and I think has gained a lot of cult popularity, whereas Adidas didn't really have a competitor in that same bracket because all they had was the Copa Mundial, which is actually a much more expensive football boot that retails for around $180. So they didn't really have a $100 football boot that could compete directly with the Nike Premier 3. So in comes the Copa Gloro, and as you can see, it does bear some resemblance to the Nike Premier in that it's a classically designed leather boot. However, there are some key differences that you're going to want to take note of. The first being the Copa Gloro is constructed from calf leather rather than kangaroo leather. Now, although that could be a big difference for some people, in my opinion, you're still going to get a really high quality leather upper despite the fact it's not kangaroo leather. That being said, it is going to be slightly less soft and plush compared to the upper that's on the Nike Premier 3, but you can see that you do get slightly more intricate stitching on the upper with the Copa Gloro. And in my experience, usually when you get more complex stitching, it can often lend itself to just better overall build quality. Now, you're also just going to get more substance with the Copa Gloro compared to the Nike Premier 3 and the New Balance 442. These are going to be the heaviest boot on this list. They're going to come in at 300 grams compared to the 260 grams of the Nike Premier 3. That being said, they really don't feel heavy on feet. They're just going to have a little bit more substance to them. And if protection is something that you care about and value, you're definitely going to get the most protection out of the Copa Gloros. Then obviously the biggest and most pronounced feature of this boot is going to be the elasticated fold-over tongue, which I think Adidas executes really, really well. It really reminds me of some of those Predator models that came out in the last couple decades, and in my opinion, I almost prefer the look of this fold-over tongue compared to the new Predator Elite that just came out. And I think part of the reason why I like the aesthetic of this boot so much is just because of this colorway. As I mentioned in my review of the Copa Gloro, I just really love this all-white design with the black and green accents. I definitely think it's the best colorway currently available of the Gloro. Although I did see online, you might be able to find an all-white version with red accents. I think that's a great looking model as well. As far as the lacing system, you're going to get this open U-throat design that's really similar to what's on the Nike Premier 3, and it's going to offer more than enough lockdown. But one big contrast is that in the heel of the Copa Gloros, you are going to have a leather heel liner compared to the synthetic that's in the Nike Premier 3. And then the sole plate on the Copa Gloros is also going to be really similar to the Nike Premier 3. That being said, it's going to be 2 studs short, so this is going to have 11 conical studs compared to the 13 that are in the Premiers. But it's similar in the fact that compared to other sole plates from Adidas, it's going to be a lot less rigid. As you can see, it has that bend throughout the midfoot, so it's going to be a little bit less intense and less snappy when you're on the field. But I really can't pick out any one thing that I dislike about this design. In the past few weeks that I've been wearing the Copa Gloros, I have been very, very impressed with them. All right, last but not least, we got the New Balance 442 V2 Pros. So these are going to be the thinnest and lightest boots on this list by quite a large margin. They're going to come in at 200 grams, which is 100 grams lighter. So basically a third less weight than the Copa Gloros, and they're going to be 60 fewer grams than the Nike Premier 3. And we'll talk about this more later in the video, but that really comes through when you're wearing these boots on feet. And not only are they the thinnest and lightest, but they also happen to be the most expensive, with the 442s coming in at a standard retail price of $130. That being said, you can very often find these boots on sale. But I think in a lot of ways, the 442s do warrant their price tag because the kangaroo leather that you're getting across the toe box in these boots is very, very soft. And they're even going to have slightly more intricate stitching compared to the Copa Gloro. And of all of the boots that I'm talking about today, I think I've probably played the most in the 442s, and I've been very impressed at how well the leather itself has held up over time. That being said, the entire upper is not going to be made of leather. You are going to have some synthetic elements, such as the logo that's seen in the midfoot here, and then also the tongue is going to be a thin synthetic material, which I actually like. It's very performance-oriented, very thin, and it wraps around your foot very nicely. I also really love what New Balance has done with the lacing system here. It's extremely deep, which is just going to give you a lot more lockdown when you're on the pitch. And as you can see here, they've actually added an additional lace hole all the way up into the ankle here. So that's in the event that you want to add a runner's loop to give you even more lockdown around the ankle, you're going to be able to do so. And the 442s are also going to have the lightest and most rigid sole plate on this list as well. And really, it's the sole plate where most of those weight savings are going to come from. And compared to the Nike Premier and the Copa Gloro, where I could pretty much bend those sole plates in half with no issue, you're going to have a little bit of spring in the toe box of the 442s. But in the midfoot, these are very, very tough to bend. So what that means is that not only are these boots going to be lighter on feet, but they're going to feel a lot more snappier when you're playing in them. And that was certainly what I felt when I had these on. Now, that being said, while I think the 442s do look pretty good aesthetically, I don't think the design is particularly creative. And from an overall aesthetic point of view, I do personally prefer the Premier 3 and the Copa Gloro. So now that we've talked a little bit about the designs of these boots, let's talk about the fit and feel. So I want to make it really clear before we get too deep into this, the fit and feel of all three of these boots is amazing. I mean, I've tried on dozens and dozens of boots over the past year, and the fit of these three boots really stands out amongst the crowd, even against much more expensive competition. Now, starting off with the Nike Premier 3, these are going to be the tightest and closest fitting boots of the three. So if you order these boots true to size, expect your toes to go all the way to the edge when you first get them out of the box. But one thing that you will experience, since these are kangaroo leather football boots, is that they do expand over time. So while I got these in my standard 10.5 US, they fit almost all the way with my toes at the edge of the boot when I first got them. Over the span of a few months, I did eventually get more wiggle room in the toe box. As far as the lockdown, you're going to get a great secure feeling from this lacing system, and I never noticed any instance of my heel slipping whatsoever. You also aren't going to get any pressure points throughout any part of your foot, and as far as the general fit goes, I think in terms of Nike boots, this is easily one of the most comfortable things that they sell. From Nike's lineup, I would put it almost on par with the Tiempo Legend 10 in terms of overall comfort. So next up, we got the Copa Gloro, and the fit on these is going to be a little bit wider and also a little bit longer than the Nike Premier 3s. And that's due in part to the fact that the toe box on the Copa Gloro is going to be just a little bit wider by about 0.5 centimeter or so compared to the Nike Premier 3. Now for me, since I have slightly wider feet, especially towards that toe box area, the Copa Gloros are going to offer a slightly better fit for me personally. And I did notice after getting these on, they do feel a little bit more premium and comfortable around the heel due to that leather heel liner. As far as getting the best fit, I personally still went true to size with these as I did with the other two football boots, so I went with my standard size 10.5 US, and you are going to get around 0.5 centimeter or so of space at the end of the boot, so if you like having a slightly roomier fit, I'd go true to size, but if you want a really close fit, you could maybe consider going about 0.5 size down. But for most people, true to size is going to be best. And another thing I loved about putting on these boots has to be the fold-over tongue with the elasticated strap. Now, is that tongue actually going to give you a noticeable difference in the fit and feel and security of the boots? Probably not, but it is a really small sensation that I do like. So overall, whether or not it's placebo, it's a feeling that I like, and I just love being able to put that fold-over tongue on when I put the boots on. And while I am really excited to break these in over the next few months, I can say that after my first few wears, the leather feels great. And finally, we've got the 442s. Now, these are the widest boots out of all three models. Now, it's important to mention that the 442s do come in standard and wide variations, and I happen to have the wide variation here, but I should note that the wide variations don't actually have a wider sole plate. They just have a more material around the upper to essentially give you more volume inside the boot. So personally, if I could reorder this pair of boots, I would probably just go with the standard version because it would be plenty wide enough for me. And as far as how these boots feel on feet, as I mentioned earlier, they are thinner and lighter than the other boots, and that really does come through. And because of the lacing system on the 442s, I also feel like I'm able to get slightly better lockdown compared to the other models as well. Similar to the Copa Gloros, I think most people are going to be able to go true to size with the 442s, but I will say if you want a truly close barefoot feel, you could consider going 0.5 size down, but if you're like me and like a little bit of room, I would go true to size. But listen, in terms of fit and feel, that's an area where the 442s really shine. In my opinion, I think they're the most comfortable out of these three boots, and that's been a general trend with New Balance. I think that they've just been killing it and making some of the most comfortable boots on the market recently. The toe box is just really well shaped and it doesn't taper too aggressively, and I think the leather is also the highest quality of the three models. All right, next, let's talk about what these boots were actually like to play in. So they were great. All three of these boots were a lot of fun to play in. And just so you know, I've gotten the most mileage out of the Nike Premier 3 and the 442s, and I'm going to be wearing the Copa Gloros a lot more over the next couple months. So let's talk about the pros and cons of playing in each of these boots. So when it comes to the Premier 3s, they are going to fit great straight out of the box, so they didn't need any break-in time for me whatsoever. The leather was really soft, and they're going to give you a close touch on the ball. However, just to mention a couple cons, the Nike Premier 3s do stretch a lot, more so than either of these two models. And while that can be considered a good thing for some people, excessive stretching can be a little bit frustrating because it can affect the sizing of your boots. As I mentioned, for most people, when you get these true to size, they might feel a little bit tight, but then they open up a lot more as you play in them for a couple weeks. And then unfortunately, another con with the Premier 3s is going to be the durability. I've owned the Nike Premier 2 and the Nike Premier 3, and with both models, I did have some issues with the durability and the leather cracking, as you can see here at the side of the boot. So if you were playing pretty frequently, so at least 2 to 3 times a week, I can really only say confidently that the Premier 3s will last around 1 season. Then when it comes to the 442 V2 Pros, these are also going to offer a very close touch on the ball, but they are going to feel thinner and lighter on feet when you're playing compared to the other two boots. And due to that sole plate, they're also going to feel snappier as well. And for me, since the 442s win in terms of overall comfort, that also means that for me, they were the most fun to play in. However, that being said, these boots aren't without their flaws, and there are a few important ones to mention. First being heel blisters. Now, I know I said that these boots are very comfortable, and I stand by that, but they don't have the best heel liner in the world. In fact, the heel liner in these boots is a little bit tough. It's a little bit too rigid, and in my first few sessions, I did have a couple issues with heel blisters. Now, that being said, the heel blisters went away completely after about 3 to 4 sessions. And since then, I have never had any issues. So if you do get the 442s and you encounter any of that issue with heel pain, I do recommend sticking with it because it goes away pretty quickly. And while I think the 442s have held up pretty well relative to how much I've played with them, you can see at the side of the boot that there is a little bit of sole separation starting to creep in, like right there. And since the sole plate on these is considerably thinner than the other boots, I found that they were a little bit more susceptible to stud pressure over time. And then when it comes to the Copa Gloros, these boots are gonna have great fit, great lockdown, and similar to the other boots, they're also gonna have a great touch on the ball that you can only really get with natural leather. And as far as how the boots look on feet when you're playing, I think Adidas probably did the best job at executing that retro design. And there isn't many cons that I can point out about this football boot yet, but I will say they are going to be the heaviest and most padded of the 3 boots on this list. Now that's going to be a bit of a double-edged sword because it does mean that they're going to offer slightly more protection compared to the other boots, but you're not going to get quite as close of a touch on the ball compared to the 442s or the Premiers. So next up, let's talk about which of these boots has the best value. So for value, at number 1, it has to be the Copa Gloro. These boots retail for around $100, but you can so often find them on sale. And if you can pick these up for $100 or less, they're just such good bang for your buck. So I think they're the best value of the 3 boots that we're discussing today, and they're also the best value in Adidas's entire lineup. Next up, in terms of value, we have the 442s. Now, their standard retail price of $130 actually is a pretty fair price in my opinion because you're getting a great quality kangaroo leather boot. That being said, at this point in time, you can often find these retailing for less, and if you can pick them up in that 110 to 120 range, I think they're also a great deal. And then at third for value, I would put the Nike Premier 3s because back in the day, just a few years ago, these used to retail for around $100, but Nike has raised the price to $120. And seeing that the Legend 10 Pro retails for just $130, which is $10 more, I think that's a better football boot than the Premier, so the value proposition is starting to get a little expensive for the Premiers. But if you can find a colorway for around $100, it's still going to be great value because at the end of the day, these are very solid kangaroo leather boots. So what are my final thoughts on these 3 boots? So if I were to purely rank these on aesthetics, so how I thought they look, I would go Premier 3, Copa Gloro, 442. Now, if I were to rank these on comfort and performance, I'd flip it upside down and I would go 442, followed by the Copa Gloro in the middle again, and then the Nike Premier 3. But at the end of the day, I really like all of these boots, so it's hard to choose a favorite. Now, if you have slightly wider feet, I think the Copa Gloros or the 442s are going to be the best option for you. But if you know from your personal experience that Nikes work for you, the Premier 3s are a great option. But keep in mind, these are all leather football boots. So if you do get a pair, be sure to break them in for a few training sessions before you take them to a game. Pretty quickly, they'll start to mold to your feet and you can really make them your own. That's going to do it for this video. If you're interested in getting some exclusive content and supporting the channel, you can check out my Patreon page in the description. It's only $3 per month and it helps me create more videos like this. Thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video.